2023 Manchester City, 2020 Bayern Munich, and 2019 Liverpool. These are some of the best teams we have seen in a very long time. And what do they all have in common? Well, among a lot of things, they all had a very versatile and dynamic defensive line, something that FC Barcelona has been without basically ever since the beginning of their downfall at the end of the 2010s. However, this curse may soon be lifted, all thanks to a 17-year-old from La Masia. But before we learn about him, we have to go back to the beginning. This team is considered by most to be the best club football team of all time. And when you think of that side, you probably remember the incredible connection of Iniesta, Xavi, and a young Busquets, or the practically perfect Messi, Henry, and Eto'o. However, what if I told you that all of their success was because of their defensive line? Well, that would be a gross oversimplification of that season. However, I believe all of their success would not have been possible if it were not for the completeness and versatility of their back line. Puyol, Piqué, Abidal, and Marquez were all vital to the success of that team, but none more than that Spanish center-back duo. And here's why. You see, what made Puyol and Piqué so great was that they complemented each other so well. Piqué dominated in the air and on the ball while also being one of the best and most natural defenders in the world. Carlos Puyol, on the other hand, was aggressive, powerful, and decisive in ways that almost always work. Barcelona have had defenders like him since, but none have been as successful as Puyol was at being that bulldog in the defense. However, it was the depth of that back line that allowed that team to be so successful in so many competitions. Without Rafa Marquez and Eric Abidal, that team could have never made it as far as it did because they could bench Puyol and Piqué when they needed a rest, allowing the team to still be successful because Rafa Marquez and Eric Abidal were very good defenders in their own right. That side had an abundance of quality to cover whenever their initial starters had to be dropped. And that's exactly how Manchester City were able to win their treble last year and Bayern were able to do the same in 2020. I would go so far as to say that you really can't significantly compete in the Champions League and La Liga without having that abundance of backup options. But I guess if Real Madrid are somehow able to compete in both La Liga and the Champions League this season, I stand corrected, but we'll have to see how that goes. At least for Barcelona, this has been necessary for both of their treble-winning seasons. This year, Piqué was just about at the height of his powers. At the time, I believe he was the best ball-playing center back to ever touch the pitch, and he was also a pretty elite defender as well. However, he was without Puyol. You'd think that that would be a problem, but Barcelona at the time had the hindsight to train and groom a player under Puyol before he left so he could cover his position. And in came Javier Mascherano. I'm not going to say he was the exact same player as Puyol, because he wasn't, and no one can ever match the leadership that Puyol brought to the pitch. But he operated in a very similar manner, a manner in which complemented Piqué's role pretty aggression. He is remembered today for always making great last-second tackles that undoubtedly spared the team from conceding and helps them win their games. And he was also no slouch at all with the ball at his feet. However, he offered a conscientiousness that complemented Piqué very well, and that's one of the reasons they were so successful again that season. To be fair, the backup options that season were not great for Barcelona. Mathieu and Bartra could cover space and fill that position when needed, but thankfully they really weren't needed very much. Both Piqué and Mascherano were relatively injury-free that season, both playing over 44 matches. And that helped them win the treble again that season. I'm sure there have been teams in the past that have been successful without that partnership at the back and without significant backups. However, Barcelona, at least in the past decade and a half, have not been one of those teams. After the 2014-15 season, Barca tried to emulate or at least maintain that combination of profiles at the back. But due to either injuries or aging players, it just wasn't ever consistent enough. They first tried to do it by pairing Piqué up with Umtiti, and though he was a similar profile to Mascherano and Puyol, Umtiti was just never consistent enough, even though at times he could be brilliant. He was just very injury prone, and that would leave the team stranded a lot of times when they needed him the most. They also brought in Lenglet, and to be fair, he was a good profile to replace Piqué if he performed, which he really didn't. but he was not that aggressive defender like Puyol or Mascherano had been before him. He was more of a ball player like Piqué, except his decision-making was significantly worse. So up until 2020, the Barcelona board had been trying to find a player to pair up with Gerard Piqué. But in 2020, a player would come in that would eventually lead to that entire conversation kind of flipping on its head. This season, Ronald Araujo finally breaks through the Barcelona starting lineup under Ronald Koeman. And straight from the jump, his aggression became very apparent. And I mean literally straight from the jump, because 15 minutes into his Barcelona career, he received a red card. Barcelona finally had their combination of an aggressive defender and elite ball player, so what was the problem now? Well, they both proved to be built out of glass and constantly go out injured, and without any great substitute options, or really any good substitute options at all, Barcelona were left stranded, and that was the case basically until the 22-23 season. That year they added Koundé and Christensen, and with the two aforementioned defenders, well, they were now cooking a bit, or at least they probably thought they were. They now had a clear starter, several great backup options, and the team looked like it should be in a pretty good spot. However, whatever was cursing Barcelona reared its ugly head yet again at the most important time in that season, when they needed to qualify for the Champions League knockout stages. Barcelona went into their match against Inter Milan, basically their final chance to qualify, with Eric Garcia and Piqué starting. Not only was Eric Garcia not at all a profile needed in this game, as he is only good on the ball and that's about all he's good at, but Piqué was clearly not having his best night either. No matter the records that team ended up setting in La Liga that season defensively, it didn't really matter to the English-speaking media, the media that I consume, because they didn't do it on the stage that matters the most to them. They couldn't perform in the Champions League, mostly because they weren't there ready to perform. Inigo Martinez signs, Eric Garcia leaves, and yet, even though they have profiles that match up well, with Araujo being the aggressive bulldog and Christensen being the decent ball player, they were conceding like nobody's business. I've spent this whole video talking about how well this combination of defenders can work together when there is proper depth. So, when they had proper depth and they weren't injured, why were they still conceding goals? Well, for the first time in basically 16 years, they were without Sergio Busquets, and it showed. Without him, any sense of defensive solidity was more or less gone. Xavi and the team tried to change that a lot in the first half of the season, but they just couldn't find something that worked consistently. Gundo wasn't good enough as the pivot, Frankie wasn't either, and Gavi looked good in the double pivot at times with Frankie for like 3 games, and then he went out injured for the rest of the season. There was seemingly no solution. This team was to be doomed defensively for the rest of the season. That is, until Xavi gave some confidence to a 16-year-old from La Masia in January, and he tried something new with one of his center backs. See, this is when Xavi finally tried playing Christensen at pivot, and though he wasn't great, it offered Frankie de Jong a bit of freedom defensively, and so the team looked a little bit better. However, this now opened up a spot in the back line, and with Inigo Martinez out injured and Koundé not in the best form at center back, Xavi didn't have much of a choice, and so he let some kid named Pau Cubarsí give it a go. And despite him being good, it wasn't exactly a surprise for a lot of people. Coming at the age of 12 from the Girona Academy, Pau had a very quick rise to the top of the talent pool in the farmhouse in Barcelona. He was the 3rd youngest player in Barca history to play in the UEFA Youth League, and he made a rapid progress in each of the levels in the academy until the point where he finally began training with the first team in April of 2023, just a few months after his 16th birthday. After he made his full debut for Barcelona against 3rd division side Unionistas, he has basically solidified his spot in the squad today. I would even say that he has solidified his spot in the starting lineup, but I really want the team to start benching these young players. They're playing way too much. Seriously, give them some time to watch YouTube and play Fortnite. They need to breathe. However, the reason I'm making this video and that I believe he will be so important for this side, more so than any average center back at another club, is because he is basically a PK regen. The kid is fantastic on the ball, and according to Xavi, someone who ought to know, he is already the best ball-playing defender at the entire club. And remember, he literally just turned 17 years old. Nonetheless, do you remember when I said the entire conversation around Barcelona defenders would flip on its head when Araujo came in? That's because Araujo is now the guy we're trying to find someone to pair up with him. And remember, he is that aggressive Puyol Mascherano-esque profile. Someone who would pair very well up with someone who plays almost exactly like Gerard Piqué, like Pau Cubarsí. Sure, defensively. I'm not saying we're ready for that or we're going to do that next season or even that I expect that, because I don't think we have the firepower going forward to be able to produce everything we need in each one of those competitions. But there is a lot of cover defensively, and even if we sell one of them next season, hopefully it's Eric Garcia and no one else, but if it's Christensen or Koundé like the rumors seem to be saying, I think we can still have that depth needed to compete everywhere. There are other names in La Masia coming up right now in Faye and Mbappe that look really good defensively and look like good options to play a couple minutes next season. And honestly, all of that support defensively will be pretty beneficial to whatever manager comes next season, because it will just provide them the ability to play around with different formations and setups. We could even play 4 center backs like Pep does at City. I've also heard people talk about that we should play Cubarsí as the pivot, but I don't really think that's a very good idea, because I think he's 17 years old and it would be probably a bad idea to play a 17-year-old out of position in one of the top leagues in the world. It just shouldn't be done. But trying him out in practice and training might be a pretty good idea, because he clearly has the capacity on the ball, and he's probably a little bit more agile than Christensen is, because I don't think you can get much less agile than Christensen is. But if you want to support me and also support Barcelona, why don't you check out my posters and merch that are all about Johan Cruyff, Barcelona, and Lionel Messi. I also got hoodies like this one. All my t-shirts are sold out, but we still have some hoodies and posters available, so check them out while they're still around. But if you enjoyed this video, go jump onto this video about İlkay Gündoğan and the crazy season he's having. It's really unparalleled with the rest of his career, and it's pretty exciting. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.